here's a pretty strong example of how Republicans function, how the party functions, what the foreign policy was, and just how people misperceive it, especially the pro-Trump people, activists, not just the truthers, but a lot of them, right? So this is like a group of people. They say they love Trump and they have the greatest expectations of another Trump presidency. They're such diehard Trump supporters, but they don't seem to really understand a lot of very important issues and policies of the previous Trump administration. There's a cross disconnect here. So this was a recent text published by Lieutenant General Keith Kellogg and Fred Fleitz. This is from April. It's called America First, Russia and Ukraine. So Kellogg was basically Trump's general security expert advisor. He had a senior role in the National Security Council. He was also acting national security advisor for a time. So he was Trump's guy. He's not some globalist, whatever some people may think. He's not just some guy removed from the Trump administration. He was a very important person. And so in this text, he gives a very straight assessment of the war in Ukraine, how the Biden administration was way too weak on foreign policy. They gave all the wrong signals, and then came the invasion, and then there were more serious mistakes or intentional sabotage maybe by the Biden administration. And so then Kellogg makes this distinction between these administrations, and Kellogg also says what a realistic peace deal would look like, how harsh it would be on the Russians, and how to make this work in the coming years and even decades. This would happen in stages, right? And this text is pretty good, I think, and I think that many activists out there, they would be completely surprised when they read that, because activists, they saw on the internet, Trump is in some crazy alliance with Putin, and they all work together on everything, and they're going to save us from the globalists. But in reality, the Trump admin had a very harsh, strong foreign policy, pushing back against the Russians on multiple fronts. The missile treaties for the nuclear missiles, pretty harsh against Iran. The Trump admin was also very much against these Nord Stream pipelines, which were ultimately blown up. And this is stuff that people seem to forget, or they were not really aware of it because they sort of live in this internet fantasy world.
And I might add that Trump also was the first president to send weapons to Ukraine.
Yeah, exactly. Lethal aid.
Obama wouldn't do it.
Yeah, lethal aid. And we saw some legislation that was even for the domestic realm during Trump. This was, I think, what was called the Countering Foreign Influence Act or something, or Countering Foreign Propaganda Act. So there were multiple pieces of legislation like this. So this was pretty serious. And so I got some excerpts and quotes from that text. And it starts with an important point here. It says, Putin saw in Trump a strong and decisive president who was prepared to use all tools of American power, peaceful and coercive, to defend U.S. interests. Similar to other U.S. adversaries, Putin also viewed Trump as unpredictable and unconventional. In light of Trump's threat to destroy North Korea if it threatened U.S. allies in the Asia-Pacific, Trump's summits with North Korean leader Kim Jong-un, moving the U.S. embassy in Israel to Jerusalem, bombing Syria for using chemical weapons on civilians, dropping America's largest bunker buster bomb on an ISIS redoubt in Afghanistan, imposing strong economic sanctions on China while keeping dialogue open. Putin could not be sure how Trump would respond to Russian belligerence. This unpredictability played an important role during the Trump presidency in impeding hostile actions by U.S. adversaries.
Absolutely.
Fair enough.
The one thing is that Trump is so unexpected and so difficult to fathom because he's so different. I mean, imagine going against the grain. You have Pat Buchanan was just did not succeed pushing this message about the border and about restrictions of trade. The Republican Party had become a free trade party, and the Democrats were willing to go along despite their commitments to labor. And it seemed like nobody could go against this because the elites wanted to invest in China, especially. Well, then Trump, but you see, this was always doomed. This is what people don't realize is that open borders and trading with China was always doomed.
Yeah.
So Trump had the vision thing, right? Thing that George H.W. Bush made fun of in 1992, the vision thing. The fact of the matter is that that was Trump saw the writing on the wall and he waited. People had talked about him running for president in earlier years. He waited until this time. And of course, part of the constituency that saw Americans see when you're a conspiracy theorist, you see the evil forces destroying America. You don't necessarily understand them. You have a narrative about them. And part of that evil that's destroying America, of course, is free trade and open borders.
Yeah.
And so here comes Trump. So he's going to immediately win this constituency. And along with the, what was it Hillary Clinton called them? She had a name for them.
The
Um,
deplorables?
the deplorables, right? They're the deplorables, right? So they're racist because they don't want an open border. They're the Jim Crow Southerners. But the reality was that secretly a lot of people were beginning to have this thought by the time you get to 2016. Wait a minute, Russia was a bad country. China was a questionable country. We were seeing more of their theft of American property. So what's ironic was that all these things that they resisted tooth and nail against Trump and called him all kinds of bad names, when he got what was it? He got a 10% tariff. I forget. He got a tariff
Mm,
passed on China, and the Biden administration kept it, and big business suddenly was for it. Why? Because they realized that it was suicide what they were doing before. They were so set on this idea and this model in their head, and all of a sudden they realized, well, Goldman Sachs is is practically been colonized by China. These people, they're not thinking straight, and so you got it to where Biden couldn't repeal it. They kept the trade practices,
yeah.
and also it was the revenue. The huge amount of revenue that we got from this was so big that they couldn't forego it.
And
They
so by
literally couldn't forego the revenue.
and so you saw sort of this duality, I think, of making these moves in foreign policy, being harsh, um being really strong in foreign policy, at the same time making some positive statements, words in public about Putin, and I think that was strategic. I think that was maybe the idea of a guy like Kellogg, because he explains that in the text. You have to be really harsh and strong, but you have to keep open some sort of a dialogue because that can reduce the overall pressure. And people, they started to pick and choose what to make of it. So they were not really looking at the actions, they were looking at the words of Trump. But I think that a lot of these words were strategic. And it says here in the text, in 2018, after the Russian mercenary Wagner Group advanced on US bases in Syria, they were met with immediate and decisive action when President Trump authorized punitive airstrikes against them. Those airstrikes set back Russia's operations and influence in the region. Russia never retaliated against the United States over that attack, which reportedly killed hundreds of Russian mercenaries, likely because Putin did not know how Trump would respond. Now, that's a bold
Well,
move because,
do you know what really happened there? Is that we thought that these were Russian troops,
yeah,
and our commander was told, "Well, go find out if they're Russians." So we called him up and we said, "We understand that these are your troops here."
no, they're
And the Russians
private.
said, And the Russians said, "Oh, we don't have any troops there." "Oh, you're certain those aren't yours?" "Oh, those are not ours." So
Kaboom!
yeah, yep, that's what happened. And so
Oh,
they couldn't
we're
say
just making
anything.
sure.
They
We're just
lied
making
to
sure here.
us.
You know, we're just making sure
Yeah,
here.
we were
Kaboom!
just making sure, and so they, because they lied to us, they couldn't come back and say, you attacked
You
our troops. We
killed
have
our
to
people.
retaliate
Yeah,
on you.
right,
No,
right.
no, you told us that they weren't yours, right?
Oh
It was
boy.
so perfect, right? It was just perfect.
Yeah.
So they
Because I mean,
couldn't
of course,
say
that was
anything.
like the panic. A lot of people had, and they still have this panic that if Americans actually kill Russian troops, that would be like panic mode,
Right.
hyper alert. But these were Wagner people, so it was a bold move. And I don't have all the details about what he says there in the text about these strikes demolishing Wagner operations in the entire region. So there was like a larger concept behind these strikes. You get more room to breathe in that area. And so this kind of got lost in all the media chatter about this, that, and the other. But it's important to make that point, and I don't think many activists really knew about this. Many activists really understood that, because they were being fed this
Mhm.
whole "we're gonna save the world with we're gonna
Yeah,
save
and
the
then
world with
meanwhile,
Putin" thing.
people are saying that Trump is a Russian puppet, which is ridiculous. He was harder on Russia than Obama or Biden has been.
Yeah,
And the thing is that he sort of set the pattern that they could not seem to be softer on Russia than him or get caught out in their lies. And this is a funny thing that happened with Trump. And of course, Trump is very cagey. Trump Trump is very intuitive, and with the Russian thing, look what he did with Little Rocket Man. And of course, South Korea is really a satellite of Russia more than it is of China, and they get their weapons of mass destruction from Russia. I think that anybody in higher up in intelligence who's authorized to tell you anything is going to say that to you. Is that the Chinese give them their conventional weapons as hand-me-downs from the People's Liberation Army, but their really strong weapons that North Korea has are coming from Russia. The nuclear weapons, the chemical weapons, the biological weapons. I mean, um, defecting North Korean soldiers test positive for smallpox
oops.
because they've been vaccinated by the against the weaponized smallpox form, which is a Russian weapon, not a Chinese weapon.
Oh boy.
So what's so interesting about that is that Little Rocket Man, they have this war of words, Trump and him, and Trump is
The
like
who's got the bigger
ready to
button,
go.
right? Yeah, I got the
Right,
bigger
who has the
button.
bigger button? And it's like, and what happens the first time a North Korean leader is going to meet with an American president to negotiate,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
And of course, what does he do? He goes there, and everybody thinks this is amazing. The president
yeah.
meets with
And we've seen
this
that
guy, and
before.
of course, yeah.
We,
And what was interesting is that Trump went there and didn't agree to anything, and just
yeah,
left. And of
and you
course, there was Little Rocket Man having to execute his diplomats with an anti-aircraft gun because that's when what happens to his failed officials when they fail, they execute them with. I don't know what that looks like. That has got to be grisly, but
Yeah, and you explained that so well in one of the previous episodes of this show when he talked about, I think it was Eisenhower, and he made the situation very clear for the Soviets. If you want to have World War III, we're gonna we're gonna have World War III, and you're gonna lose hard. So this was a time when you had to call, maybe a bluff. Wasn't, of course, not really a full bluff, but sometimes you just gotta call it like it is. And we've seen that before. And in modern days and modern eras, we saw kind of the bureaucratic politician type, especially the Germans. They're all so nice and they're all so diplomatic in their language, but you're really lacking clear statements and bold
well, just
statements.
think about it. That the fact that Eisenhower was ready to go to World War III in 1953 caused the fall of Stalin.
Yeah.
If Stalin's bodyguards are telling us the truth, the last surviving ones in the late 90s that testified. Um, why? Because Stalin was going to didn't have any problem with it. Let's do World War III now. I'm old. I want to do it before I die. And his deputies, Khrushchev and Lavrentiy Beria, thought, oh no, we don't want to die. We're not old
Yeah.
enough yet. We still have some years left. We don't want you to kill us along with everyone else. So that got Stalin overthrown. So you could say that Eisenhower being ready to go to war and being serious about it caused Stalin's fall.
Yeah, and it's like
If you think about it,
it's not just all about Trump. It's not just Trump's words. We have these people. We had these people behind him, guys like General Kellogg and others, and they can give him the options. They can say, "Okay, Mr. President, there's like 5 options here. What kind of a statement you want to give? You already chose the option for the military action against these Wagner people. So now you can choose different types of statements. You want to use a harsh statement, you want to use a less harsh statement. It's not just Trump. People in Europe, they believe that this was all about Trump, and Trump could one day make some silly decision to have World War III. That's not how it works. And this is like the
no.
media distortion that was going on all the time. And here it
Well,
says,
yeah.
and here it says in the text, it says, the Trump administration strengthened Europe's deterrence posture towards Russia by revitalizing the NATO alliance to work for American interests by pushing NATO members to contribute fairly to the alliance and meet their NATO Article 3 in Wales Declaration defense spending targets. That's what Trump meant what the intention was behind Trump's words when he said, well, if they're not going to do their thing and pay for it, why have NATO? Of course they want NATO, and the people behind Trump, of course they wanted NATO, but they had to make a strong statement to make these Europeans get active. And it's like, I always tell these Europeans here, stop the whining, stop complaining about American military bases abroad. Stop whining about American imperialism. Fund your own militaries. Do your own thing. Contribute to that. Because if things go wrong, you want the Americans to help you. So which is it? Whining about American military bases and American military force, or needing it? Which is it, right? So this was kind of a major point, because some of these European countries, they were not even meeting the 2% target, 2%
No,
spending on military.
they had treaty obligations to their defense spending, and they were not meeting those obligations.
And
year after year.
They would find ways around even the 2% target, let alone a 3%, 4% target. They were coming up with all sorts of ridiculous things like, we Germans, we don't have ammo, we don't buy ammo, we don't do this, we don't order new ammunition and weapons. It was a joke. And of course, if there's a military defense alliance, the members have to contribute. It's as simple as that.
Well, let me put it in another way.
But the truth is, before I forget that, and the truthers, the conspiracy activists, they think NATO is the devil, and NATO is the tool of the globalists, and I'm for Trump, and that's because he's against NATO. That's not how it works.
They don't understand that their own economic well-being, their own survival depends on these alliances. They don't understand that this is the structure of the world that preserved their way of life, that preserved their actual economic wherewithal. And I should say here, the NATO European countries have a much greater combined gross national product, if you combine them all together, than the U.S. has. They have more economic wherewithal than the U.S., and yet they contribute a fraction of what the United States contributes. And of course, the United States is defending, and it is useful because America is behind those two oceans, and America is in a better position to defend Europe than Europe is. But they have to do something, because the Americans can't carry all of the weight, because we have to defend the Pacific as well. Yeah. We have to maintain this enormous Navy, Air Force, and a sizable enough Army and Marine Corps to be able to respond to these multiple threats. And, I have to say, in the Pacific, Japan and South Korea obviously have stepped up. Those societies are doing their share. But Europe, it's been a sorry thing to
Disaster.
see.
So, and then it says this, and this is one of my favorite bits in the whole text. It says, the Trump administration imposed strong sanctions against the Nord Stream 2 pipeline built to transport Russian natural gas from Russia to Germany to halt its completion. Trump officials also pressured European states to delink from the Russian energy supply, an effort that undermined Russia's ability to weaponize energy in the region, and one that Europe resisted until Russia invaded Ukraine. Exactly. And I mean, if some conspiracy activist is reading this, he would say, what? I don't understand. This goes
Well,
against what I heard.
here's the real thing, Alex. The real conspiracy is you have the Green Party and the Social Democrats
Oh, yeah.
and Merkel's party pushing
The
this
commie pipeline.
global warming at the same time they're importing Russian oil,
Oh, it
and they're
gets better.
getting rid of nuclear plants. And so this is a conspiracy to destroy Germany's
Yeah.
energy infrastructure,
And it gets
to
better.
destroy Germany as an industrial power.
Because I kept reporting on this pipeline thing over the years, right? So at some point during the Trump administration, the Republicans they were getting serious. They were becoming serious. They imposed these sanctions, and it was all encompassing. They said if anybody over there in Europe, if anybody has anything to do with that stupid pipeline, you help building it, you certify it, you insure it, you underwrite it, anything. You got anything to do with this, we will block you from anything. Block you from anything American, block you from things you don't even know about. Strongest possible move you can imagine. So they were saying, this is really serious to us. And guess what the Social Democrats did in Germany? They tried to find a way around these American sanctions. They created a foundation, and they said this is a foundation to protect the environment, but this was just a tool to go around these American sanctions. This is really what happened. But people on the internet or listening to Tucker Carlson and all these people, they think, wait a minute, I thought this was a conservative pipeline from the conservative Russian president. This was a conservative pipeline, and only the left-wing world conspiracy wanted to end this pipeline. No, the Trump admin tried to stop it. For real. And it says here, this included Trump publicly criticizing Germany for making itself dependent on Russian gas imports. At a July 2018 NATO summit, Trump condemned Germany's support of the Nord Stream 2 pipeline, saying Germany, as far as I'm concerned, is captive to Russia because it's getting so much of its energy from Russia. Exactly. I mean, he's not mincing words. Captive. We are imprisoned by this nonsense, and we got up to, I think, 40%, maybe up to 40% dependency at some point. Maybe a third to 40%.
Yeah,
insane, completely crazy. And like,
I mean, how is Germany going to survive? You let go of your own coal and nuclear industries in order to take this Russian gas, and what did the Russians do the first chance they get? They screwed you.
Yeah.
They screwed Germany.
Yeah, and then people, when this gas crisis hit and the pipelines were blown up, and I'm sure that Kellogg was not crying because the pipelines were blown up. We still don't know who did it. Many people could have done it. It wasn't hard to do. The Russians were so weak in this, just so you know. This when this gas crisis happened, and there was almost a blindside. This was in the media, mainstream media here. I think I mentioned this on the show, and I read the quotes. So there was almost a Russian blindside where they would move out the money from these gas companies and the shares in Germany, so to leave us hanging. So we would be in chaos, and the Russians would then use the chaos with their political assets to create more chaos. And so when we were short of gas, or potentially short of gas, people started saying, hey, wait a minute, according to the leading experts, the geological experts, not the gas companies, not the environmental guys, the actual experts, they said we're sitting on a considerable amount of gas, way more than people realize, but you have to frack to get it. Now, guess who spread a ton of propaganda against fracking. The Russians, they funded some of these movies against fracking and
Oh
saying this
yeah,
is terrible.
they did.
Tell this to a conspiracy activist. Tell this to a MAGA guy who loves Trump and people who think they know how this all works. Tell these people how it works. Ooh boy.
Yeah, no, they see the thing that's happening here now in America is that the Republican Party, which had more of the sensible people, as the Russian infiltration of certain parts of the Republican Party, as the Alex Jones message and other things have sunk into more and more people, you have now got this groundswell where a majority of the members of Congress of the Republican uh, part of the House are not for supporting Ukraine. And it's largely because they do this. They're worried about the voters. And it's because of this transformation of the Republican Party from the Republican Party of the older conservatives. William F. Buckley died in 2008,
yeah.
right? So William F. Buckley and that whole group, and you had Buchanan that had broken off with this message earlier, and then you had the conspiracy movement. You have Alex Jones. You had the social media advancing all these very odd conspiracy theories. This has disintegrated the Republican Party. Then it lost its intellectual anchor. Now I'm a critic of William F. Buckley, but when he denounced the Birch Society, and I think it was 1962 actually that he denounced it, he said that they lacked. He said something like they lack common sense.
Yeah.
You know, they don't have a, and he said there's a lot of good anti-communists there, but this is really crazy. It's goofy
Yeah.
conspiracy theory stuff. And of course, Buckley was absolutely right on that. He was. And it was a danger. He said you have to purge them from the ranks of the Republican Party. But now they've become the most active of the activists, whereas the hard left, socialists in the Democratic Party can have this inordinate influence on the primary process, and the Democratic Party's been captured by the communists anyway. They took it over through its left wing, if you can believe what the communists were saying in the 1980s. What I overheard them saying, we're taking it over. It looks like with the nomination of Obama and the Clintons and Biden as their candidates. But the Republican Party, now this is a different kind of activist group coming into the Republican Party from the conspiracy right, and with these completely false narratives. As I read last time, the quote from Sergei Witta saying that this is a party with no viable ideas. This is where they're headed if they follow this way. Now, Trump has very viable ideas. He's right about these key issues that he got elected on. The problem is the constituency, the way they're exploiting his constituency, this group that's growing, and the kind of groundswell it's being created for people other than Mr. Trump that are followed, like Mr. Nick Fuentes, people like that,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
I mean, these people are the real crazies. These are the really dangerous people.
Yeah. Then it says this. During the Trump administration, the United States no longer tolerated Russia's repeated nuclear treaty violations and withdrew from the Open Skies Treaty and the Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces (INF) Treaty. The Trump administration also began the process of withdrawing from the New START Nuclear Arms Reduction Treaty, with Russia in hopes of negotiating a stronger and more effective treaty that also would include China's nuclear arsenal. There you go. Now, we Europeans, we are in the crosshairs of a lot of Russian missiles. They have all kinds of missiles with different ranges, and they can be fitted with nuclear warheads. Some of these rockets, smaller or medium-sized rockets, they're even stealth rockets. So it's harder to see them on a radar screen and everything. So again, this is an issue that is extremely important. And this goes completely against what a lot of people actually believe out there. People who support Trump, but they don't understand how strong that was in terms of foreign policy, pushing back against the Russians, right?
Yeah, It was so, and so going to the debate here, which was odd, is that Biden was pretending. If you really watch the debate, he was attempting to paint Trump again as a Russian agent, and the way he talked, and unfortunately Trump didn't directly answer him on this. Trump didn't really understand that. Maybe he did understand it and he didn't want to offend that part of his constituency.
Yeah.
But Biden was again framing the issue like Trump is really not going to be helping to defend our security and NATO. He was accusing Trump of being of wanting to destroy NATO. And I don't think that that's really true. It may, I hope it isn't true. But Trump makes these statements. Trump did not, he was president 4 years and he didn't destroy NATO,
Yeah. Yeah, and
right?
he
So why would he
bolstered.
destroy NATO now?
Yeah, and he bolstered NATO, as we just heard, by speaking very strong, clear words about Europe. And it's like some of these super important things, they get lost in all the chatter. People don't really realize them. They focus on something else. The sensation of the day, or the sensation of the
But
week.
Biden, Trump mentioned during the debate how much Biden was lying, and of course, you could
Uh,
see these lies that Biden was lie after lie, and it was like direct contradiction of Trump on the facts. And what's really interesting is that if Biden was lying about all that, do they trust Biden when he says he really supports Ukraine and he's
yeah,
opposed to
exactly.
Russia? If he's a
Exactly.
liar about just about everything, why is he telling the truth about that? Why
Yeah.
would they trust him on that?
Activists, yeah, these activists out there, and these influencers, these very problematic influencers, they actually believe or say that the Ukraine war is really Joe Biden's war. That he was behind it all, uh, because he wants to harm Russia with it. This is sort of what many people actually believe. But listen to this. This is from the General Kellogg here. Uh, it says President Biden's poor leadership as commander in chief, a weak national security team, and national security policies combined with a complete misunderstanding of Russia, Putin, Ukraine, and NATO established conditions that led Putin to order the February 2022 invasion of Ukraine and conduct an overt war of aggression in defiance of the United States and the international community. Early in his administration, Biden designated climate change as the main threat to U.S. national security. Biden's orders led to the precipitous U.S. withdrawal from Afghanistan, an epic foreign policy disaster that did enormous damage to American credibility and global security. The president needlessly antagonized and alienated important U.S. allies, especially Israel and Saudi Arabia, and resumed President Obama's foolhardy efforts to appease Iran in the absurd hope of making it a U.S. partner for peace in the Middle East. And it goes on like this. So yeah, it's like he even talks about some of these weak statements almost right before the invasion. I mean, you were supposed to make very, very strong statements. You can
Yeah.
always compromise later. You can always make a deal later. But at that point in time, you needed to make a super
I
strong statement.
I very
But he didn't.
carefully watched both of President Biden's press conferences before the invasion, and it was interesting. He was pretty cogent for what he is now, but Biden did make that statement. Well, if it's a small incursion, whatever
Oh yeah.
that would be, we're not going to react. And it was sort of it was very odd, but. To underscore your point, Mr. Robert C. O'Brien, who was Trump's last national security advisor, he was national security advisor from 2019 to 2021. He wrote a piece called The Return of Peace Through Strength, Making the Case for Trump's Foreign Policy. And it's in the July-August 2024 edition of Foreign Affairs, the prestigious Foreign Affairs magazine. And what he says in there is rather striking because he accuses Biden of slow walking the aid to Ukraine, of
Yeah.
bottlenecking and not really following through on the aid to Ukraine and actually says if Ukraine had been strengthened earlier as it should have been, this war would not have gone the way it did. So the thing is, the people that, and O'Brien is very likely to be the national security advisor in a new administration or Secretary of State or Secretary of Defense. I'm told that he's being considered for one of those two posts. So here's a guy who's going to be running a huge part of the government under Trump if he gets reelected. And this guy is saying that Biden did not do the job of supporting Ukraine promptly and correctly, which is interesting, right?
Yeah.
He's not saying we're going to pull out of NATO, we're going to do this. He says peace through strength. Well, strength is not dissolving NATO, and this is Trump's guy, Robert O'Brien.
Yeah.
This is Trump's guy.
And it goes on. In May of 2021, 9 months before Russia's invasion of Ukraine, the Biden administration waived U.S. sanctions on the construction of the Russian Nord Stream 2 pipeline, a decision that garnered bipartisan opposition. Holy cow. I mean, imagine what the Russians must have been what the Russians must have been talking about at the time. They probably said, look, these Americans are weak. The Europeans are weak. We got assets everywhere. They're going to forgive us. We're going to take Ukraine in a blitzkrieg style operation, and we're gonna manage the fallout. The West is not really going to do anything because they're sending all these super weak signals. This is the time. This is the time to grab the big prize.
Let me read you the headline from the BBC. 19 May 2021, Nord Stream 2, Biden waives U.S. sanctions on Russian pipeline. The Biden administration has waived sanctions on a company building a controversial gas pipeline between Russia and Germany. The U.S. also lifted sanctions on the executive, an ally of Russia's Vladimir Putin, who leads the firm behind the Nord Stream 2 pipeline. So they had the company that was laying the pipeline, we had sanctions on the executive of the company, and we took the sanctions off of that. So look at what Biden's doing for Russia. Yeah. He claims to be against Russia. So Trump is the guy that puts the sanctions on that and on the executive. Biden's the guy that comes and takes it away. So yeah. Biden's the anti-Russian guy?
Yeah. And it's like again with this whole issue of NATO expansion and maybe membership for Ukraine. Now, of course, when you read this text by General Kellogg, you understand that he does want Ukraine he does want Ukraine at some point to become a member of NATO, but the timing is really important. Or back then, it was even more important. When to do it. It should happen in stages, not rush it, not make empty promises that create unnecessary friction and pressure. It says here, it made no sense to allude to supporting eventual NATO membership for Ukraine at that time, as this would require a unanimous vote of NATO members, which at the time was highly unlikely. Ukraine also needed to meet stiff membership requirements and so on and so forth. Biden... Yeah, and so basically what we saw was empty words coming from, Biden and some others. They were talking about a NATO membership for Ukraine, but they don't necessarily wanted that. They just said it at the wrong time. And so Kellogg explains it should have happened in stages. You should have had some security partnership and take things slowly, not cause instability. This would have been the smart way of doing it. And many people who understand this type of strategy, they would agree with that. But by just blurting it out, we're going to do it soon, or implying we're going to do it soon, NATO membership, yay. This was kind of the wrong move at the wrong time. It was just empty words. So if you really wanted a NATO membership for Ukraine, you should have done it the smart way, not the way Biden and these other guys acted. And so then Biden was prepared Biden was prepared to give up on Ukraine after the February 22 invasion and offered to evacuate Zelenskyy from Kiev. Zelenskyy rejected the offer, famously replying, "The fight is here. I need ammunition, not a ride." And that was an absolutely key moment if you understand that conflict at the time. If Zelenskyy had just left, a lot of Ukrainian structures would have collapsed, especially military structures could have collapsed, and this would have benefited. This would have greatly benefited the Russians. So that offer from Biden was like this offer from Biden was like a poisoned sort of offer. This was like a poisoned gift. Oh, we're gonna put you we're gonna put you to Virginia or Europe or London. You're gonna have some meaningless exile government and blah blah blah. Ukraine could have collapsed, but Zelenskyy stayed. Again, this is not what activists out there think about. This is not what they expected. Just like if Zelenskyy had accepted this offer, Ukraine would have been done. And Ukraine would have been done, and the Russians actually would have won.
Absolutely, absolutely. Because if the leader abandons his post, it demoralizes the whole. What Zelenskyy did at that moment, knowing they were hunting him, they were coming to assassinate him, they were going to kill the whole Ukrainian government. And by staying there in the capital and defending, and you heard many military analysts, I heard it on Fox News, I heard it on other news channels, they had these military analysts on saying Kiev might not last the weekend. That first weekend when they were surrounding it, the Russians were coming down from the north behind it. They had dropped paratroops. They tried to seize that airfield that was just on the other side of the river behind Kiev. On the same side as most of the city. The city's on the west bank of the river. But it was just a catastrophe, right, for the Russians not to take that city right away, because that's what they were going for. They were going for a decapitation attack. And of course, did Biden rush to send aid to Ukraine in February, in March? No. In February and March of 2022, the United States sent nothing to Ukraine. In April, they started talking about it. I know some of the activists that were Republicans who went to Congress and said, it was the Republicans in Congress, we need to do something. We need to help Ukraine.
Yeah, I mean, like if Zelenskyy,
it didn't come from the administration.
If Zelenskyy had left, the Europeans would have then completely abandoned Ukraine. They would have said, okay, it's collapsing. That's it. It's done. There's nothing we can do. Germany, France, whatever. It's nothing we can do. It's over. The Russians gonna take this thing in a week or so. Let's just try to figure it out what we're gonna do and how long we need to wait until we can resume the gas trade with the Russians, basically. This was the situation. So this was the offer by the Biden administration. I mean, do activists realize this? Do they understand what this is? What this actually means? It's like, I mean, I get it. People are scared. People are frustrated, and there's people in politics. They will talk to you and tell you what you want to hear, tell you or reinforce what you heard on the internet. But there's so much the stuff that's going on is really, really different.